I am so excited to share that you can now watch all of my upcoming podcasts on my brand new YouTube channel for the What Now podcast. So many of you have asked for more video content, and now you can watch these powerful conversations face to face. Every story, every testimony, every moment of faith and resilience, you'll now find it all on YouTube. So I'll be posting more of my episodes there, along with new short clips and deeper insights to help strengthen your faith and remind you that you are never alone on this journey. I invite you to subscribe on my YouTube channel at Podcast What Now. That's at Podcast What Now, so you never miss an episode.
This is the What Now podcast.
In this episode of the What Now podcast, I sit down with Dr. Ben Iverson, Harvard-trained economist and BYU professor, to explore how faith and intellect can work hand in hand. Ben shares his personal journey of learning that asking questions isn't a threat to belief, it's a path to deeper conviction and understanding. We talk about balancing reason and revelation, the courage to think critically within faith, and how true discipleship welcomes both curiosity and humility. From his insights on parenting and teaching to his reflections on how being wrong can lead to greater understanding, Ben offers a refreshing, hopeful perspective on lifelong spiritual growth. If you've ever wrestled with questions about your faith or sought harmony between your head and your heart, this conversation will remind you that God invites both.
This is the What Now podcast.
Today I'm here with Ben Iverson. Welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
I'm happy to have you with me today. I actually heard you give a little TED talk over at the Marriott School of Business at BYU, and I thought, I need to interview him. So here we are. And I'll have to thank my son-in-law for that, Adam.
Yeah, no, he's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, isn't he great? He's loving it over there. So, but before we begin, can you just share a little bit about yourself so my listeners can get to know you better?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Ben Iverson. I'm a professor of finance at Brigham Young University. I've been at BYU for, I guess, about 8 years, and I taught at Northwestern at their business school before that for 4 years. So professionally, I do a lot of research. I have a PhD in business economics from Harvard. And on the personal side, I live in Midway, Utah, so just up the canyon from Provo. Born and raised in Utah. My wife and I have 5 kids. My oldest is 20. My youngest is 7. So we're just right in the thick of all sorts of like sports and high school and college and all that fun stuff.
You are in the thick of it. That's quite an age range.
Yeah, exactly. It's it keeps us busy for sure. I don't have a lot of personal life at this point, but it's a lot of fun.
It's a season.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
A season. So when you were starting your PhD, we had a conversation before this, and you were saying how your mother was kind of worried that as you gain more academic knowledge, your faith might diminish. So how did you navigate kind of that tension between intellectual pursuit and spiritual conviction?
Yeah, exactly. So, I told my mom I wanted to go get a PhD, and her first reaction was to be like nervous I was going to lose my faith. And I think like any good son, I kind of rolled my eyes like, oh, mom, it's going to be just fine. And, it turned out in the end, like it did really strengthen my faith in a lot of ways. But it's not that I didn't ever feel tension either, I think, between sort of spiritual and intellectual knowledge. And I think, in some ways, maybe she was right to like flag that as something I should watch out for. And I think it's been helpful for me to kind of be aware of that. But I guess like the way that here's the tension that I felt as I think about it. The tension that I felt was partway through my PhD, it kind of dawned on me that I was treating like secular learning differently from spiritual learning. Especially in a PhD program, you are taught to just be a critical thinker and like poke holes in everything you can and really sort of test any knowledge that might come your way. Mm-hmm. And it felt like on the spiritual side, all I had ever been taught my whole life was be believing, don't question, have faith. And when I kind of realized I was treating these two things in a like different way from each other, that felt uncomfortable a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I guess like one thing I would point out is like, if you don't ever feel tension, you might not ever be actually learning anyway. Like that tension, it's uncomfortable, but that was an important step for me in developing even more faith and becoming a better like researcher and scholar, I think, at the same time, because I sort of felt that and I was forced to sort of like think about it and deal with it a little bit. And the thing that I realized was sort of like on both sides, I needed to adjust my thinking. On like my academic side, it dawned on me that like I have to use a lot of faith in my research. And what I mean by that is, for example, I was just taking it on faith that what my professors were telling me in class was like, right. Mm-hmm. And I take it on faith when I read someone else's research paper that they actually did that research, that they didn't falsify it. And I even like, sometimes in academia, we can't prove something. It's a hypothesis and we don't have the tools at our disposal, but it's a hypothesis that like makes sense. We're not just making it up, but like, we don't necessarily have the tools at our disposal to like prove that thing. And we just sort of take it on faith a little bit. Like one example I thought of as I was thinking about this is, I'm no physicist at all, but the Higgs boson was proposed in like the 1960s and it made sense, but we couldn't prove that it existed until I think like 2012 or something like that. They finally
What is that?
Proved it. The Higgs boson, it's like I said, I'm no physicist. It's called like the gravity particle. It's a subatomic particle that gives things mass. And it was like in the 1960s, like the physicist models sort of weren't working. And there's this mathematician named, I think his first name is Peter Higgs. I could be wrong on that part, but he sort of like put the math together and the only way he could make the models work was that there had to be some particle that physicists didn't know about. So he kind of wrote up this paper and simultaneously a few other scientists had a very similar idea. So in like the mid 1960s, like 3 or 4 papers came out all at the same time saying there has to be this particle that exists. Mm-hmm. And physics kind of went on for like 50 years, assuming that existed. And in some ways you could say they were just taking it on faith. They had evidence, but like they didn't observe that particular thing. And then, in 2012 at CERN, they finally like devised a way to sort of prove that thing. But for a long time, they just sort of went on faith, I think. And like that, to get back to the original question, that was important for me to recognize like, no, I'm actually taking lots of things on faith. It's not blind faith, but like I do have to have a lot of faith in what I research and I have to decide what I'm willing to put my faith in.
Yeah,
and then
faith and discernment, right?
Sorry,
trying to discern what is best knowledge, what isn't, what are the best resources, what aren't. I mean, you can take a lot of faith principles and layer it into something like a PhD. I mean, you have to prove something. You have to have an end result. You have to have a thesis statement that you prove. So you have to ask a lot of questions.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly right. And, whenever I start any new research paper, there's a lot of faith that I'm going to be able to find something. It's like, my papers take 4 to 8 years to finish. And sometimes you don't find anything. But if I didn't have any
defeating.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's interesting because, many people fear that asking too many questions about faith could weaken it. What have you learned about asking the right questions from the right sources? We're kind of talking about that right now.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like the thing that I recognized on the spiritual side of things as I was kind of like dealing with this tension was God wants us to ask questions. Like if you think about it in the scriptures, it says over and over, Christ says, ask and you shall receive. It's like one of his most common phrases.
And Joseph Smith asked a question.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of how the restoration all started. Mm-hmm. And so, but you're right. Like how you ask the question like matters, I think, and thinking about the sources. But like my first starting point is if you're afraid of asking questions, then you're kind of also afraid of learning a little bit or afraid of like potential progress. And like that's something that for me has been important to sort of overcome, to like just be okay with like maybe I'm wrong and be okay with that and sort of sit with that a little bit.
It is different. It is a generational thing because I feel like I'm 55. My generation was kind of Gen O, generation obedience. We just kind of did the program. I didn't doubt things. I didn't ask questions, not because I couldn't. I just didn't think to even do it. It's a different generation now. They have so much information at their disposal online. and with resources everywhere, that they're hearing a lot of misinformation, and going to the right sources is really important.
Yeah.
Just like your research, right? I mean, if you're going to do a thesis on something, you have to go to good resources to have the right research to actually prove your thesis.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'm 43. I'm like between these two generations. I feel like I grew up in Gen O. I like that phrase a lot. But also I've grown up with the internet most of my life, at least all of my adult life, and like lots of this information. So yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. Like the source really matters. And for me, it's like, I don't know how to describe this exactly, but I feel like in my mind, whenever I'm reading something really about almost any topic, it's like I have a co-processor going on, two things going on in my mind at the same time. One, I'm trying to process the information, but two, I'm also asking myself, why did this person write this or say this? What is their bias? What is their angle? And trying to like balance those things a little bit. Mm-hmm. And because really, if we're honest, like no information is fully unbiased. Right. We all have our own perspective. We all have our life experiences that sort of affect how we think about things. And so even just trying to be aware of that. And that doesn't mean things are necessarily with like malintent, but just having that in the back of my mind is kind of important as I think about how much do I want to weight this source, this particular source? How much do they care about me? Or why are they putting this information out there? Like, to me, that's like really important.
What's the intent behind it? What's their history? I mean, it's right. Like if someone writes a book about Mitt Romney who loves him, it's going to sound like he's a hero. And if someone writes it about him and they don't like him, it's going to sound like he's a villain. Yeah. It just depends on what the author wants you to believe.
Exactly. Yeah. And even like all the information in both of those two hypothetical books could be true, but what they choose to omit or how they choose to phrase it really can like put a different lens on that information.
Totally. It can sway you in a totally different direction. It's interesting because we often hear about loving God with all our like heart, might, mind, and strength, but not about as much as loving him with our minds. How can using our minds in faithful ways actually strengthen our spiritual lives?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you bring that up. I mean, as an academic, it's kind of what I've sort of dedicated my life to, is like a life of the mind a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean that at all to diminish the heart and the strength. Like that all matters, that sort of dedication component. But I definitely think that God wants us to use our minds as we serve him. And that's an important component as well. Sometimes we phrase church service or even just how we go about our daily lives as like, what you do is you pray and you ask God, and God tells you what to do and you do that thing, which feels much more like we're sort of God's robots here on the earth or something like that. And I've come to think of it much more as we're God's children, which, that's kind of what we say all the time. But what do we really mean by that is like, well, I want my kids to start to make their own decisions and to try things out and think things through. And I'm absolutely here to guide them and help them like when they fall or when they make a misstep. But I think part of becoming like God is also learning to use our own minds to discern, how do I want to invest my time? That doesn't mean you don't pray and you don't ask God for help, but it does mean that sometimes you pray and you ask God for help, and then you make the best decision that you can. And that every little sort of like learning that you can have is an important step towards becoming what God wants you to become, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, agency, right? We have agency. If we're never exercising agency, how are we going to learn anything?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Sometimes I think about it like, like I mentioned, I have 5 kids. So I've taught 5 kids how to ride their bikes. And if I never let go of the back of the bike seat, they never actually learn to ride the bike. At some point, you have to let go and they have to feel that wobble, that sort of unbalance, which is a scary, terrifying feeling.
Yeah.
For them to learn how to correct that. And God's sort of doing that with all of us all the time, of like letting go, but also being there to save us and catch us. And I think a lot of using our minds is us sort of like taking that agency that he wants to give us and using it in the best way possible. And sometimes we're going to wobble and sometimes it's going to feel scary and we might even make a misstep and crash. But that's part of the learning process. And like that's kind of what it feels like, I think, to become more like God.
Yeah. And there's growth and failure. I mean, I think most people who have had successful businesses, and you're in the business world, have had failure and learned a lot from it before they've made their big success.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel like most businesses that I've learned about, my research is mostly on corporate bankruptcy. Mm. Most businesses that I've learned about, even the most successful ones, on the verge of bankruptcy.
Yeah. And
all the time, their first 15 years, they're like constantly on the verge of failure, and then they get it figured out. And like, that's an important part of the business world for sure.
Well, you've spoken about the difference between a fixed mindset and an open and growth mindset. What does that look like in both business and belief?
Yeah. Let me start with business, I guess. With business, let me give two kind of examples here. One for business in particular. So when I'm teaching in the classroom, I'm teaching students to build these models that kind of forecast the future and use that to help them make better investment decisions. And something that I try to, those models at the end of the day look like a big Excel spreadsheet. It's like very nerdy, like lots of equations. But the thing I try to drive home to the students all the time is the model that they build is not like the truth with a capital T. It's just a tool to help them like make a better decision. And really what I'm trying to get at is this like fixed versus open mindset type of a thing. I think sometimes in business, people can kind of get their blinders on a little bit. And it's like, I've decided to invest in this and I'm just going to charge full on ahead without constantly being willing to update their model and adapt to new experiences. And like most successful businesses started out doing one thing, and then they made little deviations here and there all along to end up like where they are actually a successful business. And most of them don't end up where they started out being, I think. And that's all about this like open mindset rather than fixed mindset.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's true, because I know sometimes I have more of it either works or it doesn't mindset. And so, I mean, for someone who feels stuck in the mindset of it either works or it doesn't, whether that's about faith, relationships, or career, how can they transition to kind of a more flexible and open-minded perspective? Because, and how you're raised too, sometimes you're just thought to think very black and white.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish I had like one magic bullet for like, how do you shift from one to the other? I do have a few thoughts on it, but like, I think even just being aware of it in the first place is important, actually. Like one thing I've said to people before is it always sounds good to say that I have an open mindset. What sounds scary is to say I might be wrong. But those are like synonyms that we mean. Yeah. If you have an open mindset, it means you're open to the fact that you might be wrong right now and you're willing to change your mind. Mm-hmm. And there's actually, it's really interesting. There's like psychological studies that show that like it's physically painful to be wrong. Like the pain centers in your brain light up when you're wrong.
That makes sense.
Yeah. No one likes it. And so what I think like...
Well, it hurts your pride too, right? Like if you're wrong or you fail, it affects you on so many levels.
Yeah. Yeah. It's awful. It's like you just want to avoid that at all costs. Mm-hmm. But kind of like with other even physical pain, you can adapt to that. You can just get yourself used to that idea. Like if I go out and exercise, it doesn't feel great, but if I keep doing it, you get a little bit used to it and your body adapts and adjusts. And I think your mind can do the same thing with this sort of like being comfortable with uncertainty and being comfortable with like maybe being wrong. Mm-hmm. So that's like the first thing I would point to is just be open to yourself that you might be wrong. It's kind of a healthy practice. Take something that you think is true and ask yourself, what if I'm not exactly right on that? It doesn't mean you give up on it. I'm not saying give up on your beliefs, but just ask yourself, how would you feel if that isn't exactly right? And how would you adapt? And like try to get comfortable with that feeling a little bit.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's interesting because you kind of live at the intersection of business and belief, teaching economics at a religious university. I mean, how do you balance your business and religious teachings in a classroom setting?
Oh, it's interesting. I don't feel like I have to balance those things. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is they don't ever feel like they're coming in conflict at all, but rather, actually just this morning, I was reading an old speech about the founding of BYU, and it talked about BYU as each building as a temple of learning. And it made me think about even in the Kirtland Temple, when they first built the Kirtland Temple, they had like religious ceremonies there, but they also had the School of the Prophets there, and they taught Hebrew, and all learning was just learning. And I think sort of over time, we've kind of separated those things in our minds. But for me, the older I get, the less difference there is between business learning and any other, and spiritual learning, or, any secular learning. And I try to express this to my students sometimes, that like learning is a spiritual experience. Doesn't matter what you're learning. If it's true learning, you're strengthening your faith and your belief and how much truth you have. So it doesn't feel like it's a balance to me. Sometimes what I learn in business changes how I think about spiritual things, and what I learn spiritually changes how I think about business. So there's some interaction. But in general, I really honestly feel like when I'm in the classroom, it's always a spiritual experience, even if we're just talking about, bankruptcy or discounted cash flows or like these business concepts that I deal with all the time. To me, that's like still like a spiritual experience.
Mm-hmm. I just feel like the gospel principles we're taught, the way we're taught to conduct our lives, are good business practices. You need to have integrity, to be honest, to be fair, to bury your pride and accept responsibility, to be a good leader. I mean, these are all characteristics of Christ. I mean, if we really are disciples of Jesus Christ, we can be pretty effective leaders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know. I think there's a crossover.
For sure. The one thing I would add to that is, I feel like especially maybe once you're past the age of like 23 or 24, most of the struggle in life is deciding how to invest your resources, which is a business idea. How do I invest my money? How do I invest my time? It's not like I wake up every morning and ask myself, like, am I going to go punch someone in the face today or not? Or am I going to like drink alcohol or not? Are these like sort of basic commandments? It's much more, do I spend the next hour with helping my kid, or going to my ministering families, or going to the temple, or doing work, right? And like these investment decisions are hard. Like there's no right or wrong answer. Yeah. But those are like essentially sort of business questions, in the same way that like a CEO wakes up every morning and doesn't ask themselves like, should I tank my business? But rather, what do I invest in and what don't I invest in today? And so for me, there is actually a lot of crossover in that regard as well. In addition to all those things you said about, like honesty and bravery and loyalty and all these things that are important, like spiritual components help your business as well.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen that. I know with our family business, my uncle was going to the temple about some major business decisions. I mean, the company was at its stake during the 80s when we had that massive recession. It could have ruined the company. I mean, it's touch and go there with bankruptcy for a while. I mean, it's scary when you're leading a huge institution, employing thousands of people. And then, he turned to his faith always. So I think there's a really good crossover with people. I don't know. I think as business leaders, I heard Dean Kim Clark. I always call him Dean because when my husband had been at Harvard Business School, he was the dean of Harvard Business School there. And when he gave the graduation speech, the speech he was giving to these Harvard Business School graduates was basically like a church talk. Like, go out there, enter to learn, go forth to serve. Mm-hmm. And no success compensates for failure in the home. He said that. I was like, oh my gosh, this is like, these kids don't even realize what he's saying. These are like gospel principles here.
Yes.
And so anyway, there is definitely crossover. So you've spoken when we were talking earlier about your mother and about how your mother has shaped your life, both by encouraging you to spread your wings and by offering caution when you were going to get your PhD at Harvard. I mean, how has that relationship evolved as you've matured?
Oh man, my mom is fantastic. I love my mom and my dad. I can't leave him out either. They're both really great. The one thing you barely said is like such a huge deal, which is both my parents have allowed all of us kids to spread our wings. I think that's been really important. So I'm the youngest of 6, and all of my older siblings have just gone on and done really amazing things. And we've, some of us live in Utah now, and some of us have like bounced around across the country and around the world. And, like your mom is always your mom, and she's always been there giving advice or whatever. But one thing that I think I've really learned from my parents, during my adulthood has been watching them come out and, for example, like stay with me for a week in Boston or Chicago or New York, some of the places that we've lived in, and be anxious to learn from that experience. Like my parents, I think if you met them on the outside, they seem like classic Generation O people, like you were saying before. My dad's a stake patriarch, and they go to the temple every week, and they're super, super faithful, but they are incredibly open-minded people in their own way. And they have loved learning about the church in different parts of the country and seeing how it works there, and getting to know our friends who are Jewish or Muslim or whatever, and loving them as much as they love anyone else. And, my parents, they are just learners. They love to learn. And that's been really, really fun for me to see and inspiring for me to see as an adult, rather than get fixed in my own ways. My dad's 82 and my mom's 78, 77, something like that. Yeah. And they're still out there trying to learn how to use Instagram and like how to email and use Zoom and all these great things. And that's super inspiring to me. And it's been like an incredible part of my relationship to watch them continue to learn, while also like give me advice and counsel, which I desperately need all the time with my family and our stage of life and struggles we have. And it's been a really fun dynamic, to be honest.
Oh, that was modeled for you, right? Learning and educating yourself and growing and developing. I mean, it's great. They're still doing that. They're staying relevant. Yes. Getting up on technology, that they're accepting of people of other faiths, and that they're open-minded in that way, that they're inclusive. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So what lessons from your mother have stayed with you most as a parent and teacher and a disciple?
Lots of them, obviously. And so I would point back to the open-mindedness. I think that's been really important. Something else that's stuck with me that my mom did really well that I don't think I appreciated as much when I was home. So if she ever tunes into this, well, she probably
send
will.
Send her this podcast.
Yeah, exactly. But when I was a younger teenager, I would do something wrong. I was never like a bad kid, but come home late, break something, whatever. And my mom was very good at giving lectures. She wanted to teach, but you know what she didn't? And I hated those. It made me feel terrible. I felt guilty. It was awful, but she almost never gave consequences. And that I didn't like even realize that more till I was a parent. And I started wanting to like punish my kids. and it dawned on me like, oh, she was really smart about letting natural consequences just happen. And let me just use this as a teaching moment, rather than, I don't need to be the sort of the bad guy here, but all I want to do is just teach and use this moment to teach. And sort of the world is going to give us enough natural consequences, I think, as it is. And that has been a really important lesson to me from my mom in particular, but really from both my parents. I can't hardly remember any real consequences that I ever had. I was never grounded that I can remember. I didn't get extra chores. I was expected to do my chores, but it was just more of a like mentor relationship than a like punishment type of relationship. And that's been, I think that's helped our relationship stay as strong as it is like now, even.
Oh, totally. Then she's really teaching you, right? She's educating you on the reality of the consequence and the natural consequences. It's true. When you choose behaviors, you can't always choose the consequence. And maybe when the natural consequences happen, that's punishment enough.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
That's a really great way to raise kids. I remember my dad's really good friend. They had 8 kids, and he had the same parenting style as your mom. And they would explain things and like help us understand what you were thinking when you were doing this. And they really helped their child dissect what they were doing right and wrong and how to do it and improve it better. It's so much work to do that. When I had my 2 kids, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so much work to parent that way.
Oh yeah.
But it is so effective, and it's great. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you, I just have a couple last questions that I just was wanting to ask you too. Like, how do you personally balance intellect and inspiration? I mean, being both analytical and faithful in daily life, because you're doing that constantly in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good question, and something that I think about all the time. One thing that I've come to realize is, I think so often in the church, we talk about inspiration as a feeling, especially like a warm feeling, something like that. And I've certainly had moments in my life that I feel that, in particular, I think about in the Bible, when Christ talks about the Holy Ghost, he most often calls it the Comforter, as just a good, nice, comfortable feeling. And that's really important to me. But the other thing that I've realized is I think at least for me, and maybe for some members of the church, I'm more prone to feel inspiration in my mind than just in my heart, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And like sort of getting to be okay with the fact that maybe I don't feel the Spirit exactly the same way that someone else feels the Spirit. And that still is feeling the Spirit. That like, having a thought come to my mind, or, the one that happens to me really commonly, I would say, is I'm, teaching a class at school or teaching a lesson at church, and something someone else says or something that I say just sort of like sparks this connection that I've never had before. And I don't know how to really describe this, but the way that I feel like it feels is an idea in my mind that then is confirmed in my heart, but is sort of that direction rather than heart first and then mind, or heart only. And it's been important to me to recognize that like that is a valid and legitimate way to feel the Spirit, as every bit as valid as feeling the Spirit in the classic, warm feeling in your heart that we often describe. Mm-hmm. And that helps me feel like, again, kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, it's not so much a balance between inspiration and intellect, but a collaboration between the two. They're, to use economics terms, they're complements and not substitutes. They complement each other. They don't substitute for each other. And I think as a church, we're getting actually a lot better with this. Like I've heard so much more. I've heard this really often from some of my local leaders, this phrase, that information breeds inspiration. I don't know if you've ever heard someone say that, but
I've heard that catchphrase. Yeah.
Yeah. And I 100% kind of believe that like we should expect these things to work together rather than to work against each other. And maybe we need to, for me anyway, I need to relax a little bit about trying to decide, was this inspiration or was that just my own thought? Mm-hmm. It kind of doesn't matter. Like as long as it's good and it's righteous, and you're then and you don't have any reason for God, like God's not telling you don't do it, then stop worrying so much about it and just go do it, And
I think it's so good. I think Elder Bednar has been talking about that a lot lately too. Just, don't overthink this so much. Just if it's something good and it leads you to Christ, it's good. You don't have to overthink it. You just do it.
Yeah. Exactly.
If it's a net positive outcome that leads you closer to your belief in God and Christ, then it's a good thing. Or if it's helping people, serving people, we don't have to overanalyze what the source is. Like, is this really from God? If it's good, it is.
Yes.
That's good. I like that.
Exactly.
So I just want to wrap up. So if you could leave our listeners with one takeaway about using their minds in discipleship, what would it be?
one takeaway. I mean, it's hard to narrow it down to just one, but
I'm asking someone with a PhD to do one takeaway. They're like, that's not possible.
yeah, exactly. Not to mention, I have a PhD in economics. Like, we're famous for having two hands at least. No, I would say, for me, the biggest takeaway has been, let me phrase it this way. I stopped using the phrase like faith crisis. And the reason why is because I feel like when you discover that something you used to believe is not true, that shouldn't be a crisis. That means your faith is deepening. And now the important thing that I want to like be really careful with here is, and this is kind of leads to my real main point, is when you discover that something you used to believe is not true, what I mean by that is it doesn't mean you like throw out every bit of experience you ever had, or you immediately shift from like belief to unbelief as this like sharp, dramatic change. That really isn't like a very reasonable way to even deal with faith and using your mind and like an more intellectual approach to spirituality. And let me like highlight that with one example from science, and then talk about how this applies to spirituality, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So scientists, we all have known about gravity for forever, right? Like gravity is like this fundamental principle. So gravity, you would predict based on gravity that the universe is expanding at a decreasing rate. Basically, we have the Big Bang, the universe is expanding, but gravity is slowing that expansion down, and eventually it would kind of collapse back in on itself. Now, again, I'm no physicist, certainly not an astrophysicist, so I don't know the details of like what's going on here. But not all that long ago, I think probably in the last 30 years, scientists discovered that the universe is expanding at an increasing rate, not a decreasing rate. And the question is like, what do you do with that? And importantly, so here's like something scientists like believed, and they discovered it wasn't true, right? They believed that the universe is probably increasing at a decreasing rate, and they found out that wasn't true. What do you do with that? Well, you don't just say, therefore gravity doesn't exist. That's not a rational thing to do. You don't like give up entirely on everything that you've built, but rather you think to yourself, there's some part of the model or some part of the universe that I didn't account for, that I don't understand yet. And I'm going to have to be open to adjusting for that, but it doesn't mean I throw everything out. And to take that to like spirituality, say, for example, I've always had like faith in the Book of Mormon, and then I learn Joseph Smith translated it using a seer stone rather than with the Urim and Thummim or something like that. Okay, that doesn't mean I throw out all those wonderful experiences I had with the Book of Mormon just because something changed. It means, there's some part of my model that's a little bit different, that I'm going to need to think about how I adjust that.
Yeah.
And like, that's been important to me to recognize that like faith and belief should evolve, but they should evolve slowly, and they should evolve in a way that takes into account all of your previous experience and all of your previous knowledge, while being open to adjusting and changing. And that way it never has to feel like such a crisis. It just feels like line upon line and precept upon precept, or light grows brighter and brighter until the perfect day, to use a couple different scriptural phrases that like relate to this. To me, that's been incredibly helpful. And I feel really grateful actually that I don't feel like I've ever really had a faith crisis in any major way.
Yeah.
But my faith has evolved, and I believe different things today than I did 10 years ago. And I hope I believe different things in 10 years than I believe now. Because if I don't, I've kind of like wasted those 10 years in some way.
No, I like your word adjustment, that you used the adjustment, because we're making these little adjustments. And in the church, we make adjustments.
Yeah.
I mean, the church makes adjustments all the time. In the temple ceremony, they make little adjustments. In the mission program, they make adjustments all the time. And without throwing away the main principles, they just adjust them.
Exactly.
So I think that's such a good point. I really like that. Thank you so much for joining me today. I loved our conversation. I loved about how we can talk about using faith with our minds in a good way, in a productive way, and to adjust our mindset when needed. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It's been so much fun to chat and get to know you. And yeah, thanks very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
This is the What Now Podcast.